All right, good evening. It is 6 p.m. It is June the 1st. This is a public hearing meeting for the Town of Spencer Board of Aldermen, specifically for the purpose of receiving comment on the new General Statute 160D, Uniform Development Ordinance, or Spencer Development Ordinance as it's being called. And so with that, we will start with an invocation by Mr. Steve Miller.
Thank you, sir. If you bow your heads, please. Dear Heavenly Father, we'd like to thank you. Thank you for this beautiful weather we're having. Thank you for all the wonderful work that our employees of the town is working for. Look after them, look after our citizens in town, and bless the work of everybody in around the town. We ask it in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, very good. So, Peter, do we have a short presentation to start with before the public hearing?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Mr. Harris, I'll invite you forward.
I just have a brief, well, it's a medium-length introductory statement. For the benefit of the board and for those gathered, I'm going to read the statement for the sake of the clarity of the record, and we're going to go ahead and begin. All right, so good evening, Mayor and board members. We're here tonight to conduct a public legislative hearing to receive comments on Spencer's new Unified Development Ordinance. The draft UDO, which has been made available to the governing board and to the public for review since May 11 on the website and at Town Hall, represents the combined efforts of town staff, members of the planning board, and our expert planning consultant to update and modernize the town's zoning, subdivision, and development standards. These updated standards help to bring Spencer into alignment with best practices in land use regulation and into compliance with the state of North Carolina's land use laws, which were substantially updated last year as part of the 160D process. The standards in the UDO govern how land is used in Spencer. They apply to any new development proposed in Spencer's planning jurisdiction to ensure that the development is consistent and harmonious with Spencer's character and its long-range planning objectives. The standards govern the size of new lots created through the subdivision process. They govern the types of buildings that are constructed, whether it's a new detached home or a townhome project, a new commercial shopfront or office, or a new industrial complex or large employment center. The standards regulate the construction of new streets and sidewalks, signage, parking, landscaping, open space, and beyond. I want to thank members of our planning board. I'm not sure we have any planning board representatives here, but I want to thank them for their work, as well as the work of Mr. Flo, our consultant, for the efforts they've made in drafting the new UDO. Our professional consultant has vast experience in working with smaller towns and municipalities on projects like this. Ultimately, the goal of everyone who has put their mind to this project has been to ensure that the town is equipped with the tools that it needs to both respond to increasing development pressures while also controlling new development so that it fits with our neighborhoods and our community. It's no secret that we live in a dynamic and fastly growing region, and the housing market is hot. Charlotte recently eclipsed San Francisco and Indianapolis to become the 15th largest city in the United States. Raleigh is the fastest growing metropolitan area in the country, or the second fastest metropolitan area in the country. Spencer is in a position to seize this opportunity. Our future as a town depends on attracting new families, building our workforce, and attracting new large employers, and working with our partners on quality of life projects like expanding the Standback Education Forest, redeveloping the old Yadkin River finishing site, and creating new destinations and activity centers to attract visitors from across the region and further afield. The most important function that the town can serve, as it seeks to seize and control future growth, is to create transparency and predictability in the development review process. The new UDO accomplishes this by setting down the town standards in black and white, reducing ambiguity. In this way, the town becomes a better partner for citizens and developers both. And so I wanted to list a few of the specific improvements that are included in the new UDO. The new UDO reorganizes and consolidates regulations across 23 new topic-specific articles in a way that is more user-friendly to both town staff, to citizens, and developers. The new zoning map converts and reorganizes Spencer zoning districts to more accurately reflect conditions on the ground. This ensures that standards for setbacks, lot dimensions, allowed building types, parking requirements, and open space requirements, to name a few, fit the context for development. The new UDO allows for a variety of building types to reflect how development trends are evolving. The ordinance establishes standards for new townhomes and multifamily buildings and accessory dwelling units to ensure that they are compatible with our neighborhoods in terms of density, scale, height, setback, and architectural design. The new UDO updates and streamlines the permit review process, clarifying step-by-step procedures and requirements for projects across the board, whether it's for a simple new fence or a 50-home major subdivision. And finally, the new UDO updates and expands the zoning table of uses, clarifying the uses allowed in each of Spencer's 14 new zoning districts. In closing, I just wanted to say that the new UDO is going to be a living and evolving document. No development ordinance is ever cast in stone. As we begin to work with the new ordinance and use it to review projects, I'm sure we will find areas that we need to update over time. As Mr. Morris mentioned in his experience in Salisbury, when they adopted their LDO, the very next meeting, they made an edit. And so we will find that we will need to make certain edits to this document moving forward, but I feel confident that the document under consideration represents a substantial improvement to the current zoning ordinance, and the town will be well served by the standards. And so that concludes my statement. Thank you for indulging me. What I think we'll do now is receive public comment, and then after that, we can engage in any necessary Q&A with the board. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Harris. All right, and with that, we will now open the meeting up for a public hearing. I do see we have a few folks here with us tonight. I will first start by asking the town manager and town clerk, have we received any written correspondence on the matter for public comment? Okay. Yes.
I will just say for the record, I received 2 inquiries regarding specific zoning questions. One was for a district that's currently in our highway business district. The initial draft of the zoning map proposed to insert it into the residential district. And so since that represented a categorical change instead of a conversion, we're going to go ahead and keep it in the commercial district. And we also received one question about, there was one citizen who wanted to change a parcel to commercial, even though it's currently residential, and we decided not to include that in the map as well. So in short, the 2 comments that I received are ones that we have addressed.
Okay, very good. All right. With that, we will now open it up for folks that are with us here tonight. If you desire to speak publicly, we'd ask that you come forward one at a time. You will state your name for the record and your address, and then you'll have 3 minutes for public comment. At 1 minute remaining during your time, I will hold up a card to indicate that you have 1 minute remaining. And then at 3 minutes, I will hold up another card that indicates to stop. So with that, we will invite the first citizen forward.
Don't be shy.
Don't be
shy.
bashful.
My name is Frances Driscoll. I live out on Longsphere Road at 710. I have 4 houses and not quite 70 acres out there. And when I was asked what I expect from y'all, I just said, I just wish you'd leave me alone. But in terms of zoning, since we have been out there, I have been zoned everything from heavy industry. One brief shining moment, we were residential, but that passed quickly. Right at the moment, we're highway business, whatever that is. Now, the thing of it is, during all this changes of zoning, nothing's changed. I still have the farm, the horses, the dogs, the cats, whatever's. And there's just been no industry. And now, I will have to admit, I do have people, since Chewy came in, offering to buy my property for tiny little bits, much less than the tax value. Although the last piece I did manage to talk them down, so now it's only 3 times what I paid for it that the tax value is. We're not going to talk about what you did to me tax-wise. I bought property from Steve. What can we say? I think he's enjoying my daddy's money.
That's just
But,
real too.
At any rate, when you're going to develop property or when you're going to zone property, the idea of doing this without actually looking at the property, because the creek that runs through there, the last piece of property I bought, because I could hear my Uncle Gray say he bought it to protect the head of the creek. So, yeah, I protected the head of the creek. I'm so excited. But anyway, when you follow that creek through the property, what you're doing is you're going through an area that is not going to, probably not going to even hold a building. I know the lady who was going to buy the 18 acres I wound up with was going to have to put in a $12,000 septic system. So just how developable this is, that's a considerable question. I've invited him to come and I'll give him tools. Wear your boots. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Driscoll. All right, is there anyone else wishing to speak tonight? All right, hearing none. Is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
The motion by Ms. Hovis, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mayor Pro Tem, all in favor? All right, all opposed?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I was
Are you, is that for or against?
for.
Okay, very good, thank you. All right, with that, the public hearing is closed. And with that, we'll now move to any question and answer that we might have from the board or. All right. With that, are there any questions from the board, specifically for Mr. Harris or Mr. Flo?
Well, I've got a couple.
Okay.
So I'll start right off. The areas that are zone commercial 85 and industry or industrial that butt or pass over Long Ferry Road to the other side of I-85. Now, is this going to change with this new map? How long ago were they changed in terms of, you know, the zoning? Was it broken up, you know, for this specific zoning cycle or these new standards, or was it already zoned commercial?
I can speak to that and Mr. Flo can follow up. On the new zoning map where you see the pink industrial district, much if not all of that is currently zoned industrial. So this does not represent any change in the zoning category for that area. And in terms of the zoning for Long Ferry Road, where we see in the new map the C85, which is the commercial 85 district, that is substantially similar to the existing category, which is the IB Interstate Business District. In 2008, when the current future land use plan was adopted, the area on Long Ferry was designated for future commerce uses, and I think that's why we received a comment about the fluctuating, you know, zoning category for that area. At some point in the past, the governing board made a decision to try to encourage new development there that's easily accessible by the interstate. And I think that's why it has the zoning district that it currently has, the interstate business. So in short, where we find industrial and commercial uses on Long Ferry Road, the new zoning map does not substantially change what's the current zoning out there.
I'd like to add a couple of things to it too. When we prepare a new zoning map, wherever we do this, there's a system to that. And it starts with industrial. The reason it starts with industrial is if you've got an area zoned industrial, or it's a major job creator, zone. I'll start over. Is that better? Okay. We've got something going on. It's so flawed. There we go. Thank you. That's a hard-working manager right there.
That's why he gets the big
Man of
bucks.
many talents.
When we prepare a zoning map, we always start with industrial. And there's some very important reasons why we start with industrial. We don't guess at it, we don't make it up. Now, if you had no zoning, we would use some very clear location economics and location dynamics criteria for that in a future land use map. And then you could zone it agricultural and let it sit there until it's time to rezone it industrial if you wanted to. But when we are preparing a replacement map or replacing a map that went with a previous ordinance, we always start with industrial because when you, and this is going on right now in another town, not too far from you on I-85, when the state identifies industrially zoned property at the Department of Commerce level, they may be working on discussions with major employers based on that public information. The fact that you had adopted industrial zoning in an area. They may not say much about it. They may not bring you into the conversation locally until they get further down the road. But we find that quite often, if we were to go in and change that away from the industrial, you don't know what big project you might be tripping. You know, you've got the Chewy type of facility that is probably the most recent type of employment, economic-based employment type of development project in this part of Rowan County on this, what I'll call the northern end of 85 corridor in a while. And we don't know when we might trip one of those up. So we automatically start with industrial. The second thing we go to are the civic, which is driven by largely ownership. Is it school property? Is it religious institutions? You know, what is it that, is it local government? Is it state government? Is it federal property? You know, so that ownership usually is where we go to determine civic. The third thing that we go to are your corridors, your commercial corridors, where you've got a little bit of character established that largely predated zoning of any kind. That might have been along the national highway, what we know of today as US 29, what you might call here Salisbury Avenue. You know, when that was the main corridor beside the railroad tracks, there were a lot of business locations. So there's a lot of that character that's been established. Then we go to the neighborhood character, and we go, you know, we figure out what's out there today, as Mr. Harris pointed out in his comments, so that we're not yanking the rug out from under those established uses. Then we look at the lesser developed areas, largely on the outskirts, around the perimeter. And that's largely where the new development zoning goes. Those business areas and the new development potential areas. Everything else is pretty close to what is on the ground. Because it's not very typical to go in and tear down a bunch of existing that's healthy and replace it with something new. So we want to zone with standards that protect the people who live there today or that work there today, to not yank the rug out from under their feet. But at the same time, we want to be able to look at where change
has been acknowledged through some instrument. In your case, it was the adoption of your comprehensive plan a few years ago that gave us some indications about what you wanted, where you wanted to go, and what have you. Because as you know, the ordinance has to kind of take you towards the direction of that plan. So I wanted to give you a little bit of history, sir, on why the industrial, the way it was, to sort of supplement what Mr. Harris said, but also kind of lay of the land as to how we actually derive. And that's kind of at the higher level, sort of in general. There's lots of little nuances in there.
The main reason I wanted to bring that up was there are a lot of rumors that this is only a precursor for a land grab, for an annexation. And I would like to go on record to say that, you know, from everything that I've been told by Kyle and Joe, that this is not the case. This is, we have no, as far as I've been told, we have no plans to extend our extraterritorial jurisdiction. Is that correct?
Legally, we cannot.
Okay.
All annexation now in North
So, yeah,
Carolina.
there's a lot of rumor out there that this is nothing more than a precursor to a land grab and an annexation. I just want to make that clear that it's not.
The only way we can annex is voluntary annexation. So if a neighborhood comes to us or property owners come and specifically ask to be annexed in, the town can take that under advisement. The rules changed several years back, and basically we cannot annex now. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Flo.
For the record, I'd like to clarify the mayor's comments, which are largely effectively the case now. But when you use the word legal, I wanted to go back in on that one a little bit, because the annexation and extraterritorial jurisdiction are two entirely different things. And I want to stay on the zoning topic first, and then I'll go to the annexation. Extraterritorial jurisdiction does not establish what is called prior jurisdiction, meaning an area that's eligible for you to annex. It merely is a land use standards and specifications jurisdiction. In other words, if a new subdivision were going in that area, outside your town limits, but in the extraterritorial jurisdiction, it would meet your standards and specifications. That's what that means. In all likelihood, because of utility extensions and things of that nature, you would want to require annexation into the town to be, if you're going to have density and, you know, like 3 units per acre, water, sewer, you know, houses on 10,000, 12,000 square foot lots, things like that, you would want that to be in, because people are going to expect services like garbage collection and water and sewer to be available. So you ideally would want them to voluntarily annex. Now, on the issue of involuntary annexation, which is when a municipality initiates, as you referred to it, Alderman Morgan, land grab, that was quite common until the statutes were changed. The change did not take that authority away from local governments. It just made it very unlikely that you would ever effectively be able to use it any longer. It almost copies the South Carolina. It uses the same qualification standard, but it borrowed South Carolina's procedure, which requires basically approval from the people that are affected by it for all practical purposes. So for all practical purposes, it's no longer a tool in the toolbox. So there is, and for this individual, and I've been working with you now for over 6 months, for this individual, from this individual's perspective, I've seen and heard nothing that gives me the impression that this has anything to do with any kind of expansion of the jurisdiction of the town through city limits or ETJ. You have ETJ now, and annexation would 99.999% of the time come through voluntary petitions or requests for services. Okay, a lot of towns are actually surrendering ETJ because of the annexation issues and using water and sewer to attract voluntary annexations. Okay, so there's been a kind of a big shift in how policy works.
So just to clarify, there's no portion of this plan that would change the boundary of our current corporate limits or our extraterritorial zoning jurisdiction.
Correct.
Yes.
Mr. Morgan, you're entirely correct in your statement.
Okay, thank you. That's a first. Will you mark that down?
It's on the record.
First and probably only.
Mr. Mayor, you were right behind him at about a 99.
Yeah.
Thank you for verifying and elaborating on that. Because I hope that it goes a long way to squelch some of the rumors that are. And I have other questions too. But I don't want to take up the whole time. Does someone want else?
Well,
jump in?
No, I think we'll let you. I would like right now for Mr. Flo to clarify the whole impetus and driver for doing this, right? And that being the state's requirement to update.
That's the rumor that's going around, yes. No. No, that is absolutely correct, Mayor. This, to give you a little bit of an overview for your public and for the record, about 7 or 8 years ago, there was a push to start to go into the records because we had essentially at the time over 50 years of changes to the state law, which was enacted, the modern language was enacted in 1959, establishing zoning authority, land development standards, things of that nature, in the context that most people are familiar with. And so every long session, there'd be little adjustment here or a little adjustment there for 50 years. So there were lots of little adjustments, and sometimes they would be taped on with Band-Aids, basically, in kind of awkward places in the rules, so that it might have made sense that day, but it might be hard to find in the future. A second thing that was happening was we had case law. Case law is essentially where an appeal was taken before a town and wound up in the courts, and a ruling would have been made by typically their bench trials, which means a judge. Unless there's money involved, the juries don't get involved in it. But generally speaking, a judge would rule on whether that staff member maybe was correct, or a lot of times it's whether the Board of Adjustment followed due process in hearing an appeal or a variance or whatever the case may be, or whether a governing board erred in its process for like a rezoning or something like that. And that case law handed down through those little decisions all over the state over a period of 50 years or more also complicated things, because that meant that a lot of what was being used by the courts to interpret the law was not actually written in the law. I'm putting my hand on the actual law. Okay, so you had awkward amendments to the written law, and you had case law piling up in the background. As North Carolina began to grow very rapidly, and thank you for pointing out the growth rate, that became more problematic. We started seeing national companies, international companies coming to our state, and it became very difficult to navigate. The North Carolina Bar Association appointed a committee to reorganize it, to get it in better shape, to easier to find and follow, and to reach over and get the implications out of all the case law and actually put them in the law. So if the case law kind of clarified something, let's go ahead and bring that clarity into the written law. So it became easier. And they worked on that for several years, and and I had an opportunity to comment on it, as probably did Mr. Morris as well, back about 5-6 years ago. And I did on what was working and not working. Now, at the time, there were no fundamental changes to the policy. But anytime you take a statute and you reintroduce it into the House or Senate in Raleigh, it's now open season.
Yeah.
And so I say that with tongue in cheek, because nobody in here is a politician, are there? Nobody? Right?
Absolutely not.
politicians at that level, anyway, will seize an opportunity to make their mark quite often. And many of them did. And some of those marks were affected by lobby groups and special interest groups, home builders and realtors and all kinds of groups. And so you saw some of the effects get into the final, more or less final version that was released in 2019 and adopted as Session Law 2019-111, which went into effect in June of 19, setting an effective date for the changes to be made of January 1, 2021, and the effect of the statute to as to its things that wouldn't be in your ordinance of also January 1, 2021. So you had an effective date of the requirements and you had a deadline all the same day. So I started writing, and I started writing twofold. I had to write to keep the old references and then the new stuff, and then have this magic period where everybody was going to vote in late June, and that we assumed the courts wouldn't mind if you adopted in late June, even though you didn't have the authority to until January 1. But it was, the deadline was January 1. So we did our best. Then came coronavirus. And there was some funding that came out of Washington in the spring of 2020. A little bit of funding that came to the states, and the states were going to push with that, and the states were also adopting the coronavirus relief bill measures. There were a number of measures dangling off the back of the book like a piece of two-sided scotch tape with a little torn off piece of paper on it was a change to 160D to move the deadline to August the 1st of 2021. So you actually had 8 months, 7 months, 7 full months from the time that it went into effect to the time that you had to get your changes made. And that was nice. But by the time I got a copy of that session law, which we won't even number because it didn't really matter, within 2 months, on June 19th, the governor signed a bill that became Session Law 2020-25 that went in and played around some more, muddied the water a little bit in the statute, in the brand new statute, and moved the deadline from, which had been January 1 of this year, to August. They scooted it back to July 1. So they chopped a month off for us. And then decided, well, while we're at it, let's just make it effective now. So it actually became effective June 19th of 2020, which means anything that is done that is out of sync with the new statute has to be done in sync with the new statute, even if your old ordinance doesn't say so. So we've been under that statute now for a year almost. So that is a little bit of the history. Now, I want to tell you one more thing about it. They actually got it backwards. All of it is backwards because they established a date for your plan to be updated of July 1, 2022. And if any of you have ever been involved with any kind of building or development at all, you know that you build with a set of plans and specifications. So you kind of want your plans done before you worry about all the little specifications. You know, what is it we're going to do before you work that out? Well, they got the specifications deadline in front of the plan deadline. So just as a piece of advice, if your plan is more than, say, 10 years old, the School of Government says 5 years for areas that have got a lot going on, 10 years for sleepy places. So worst case scenario, 10 years, although you're not sleepy here. And if that deadline next summer, July 1, 2022, is not met, it actually invalidates what you're doing today. So you may meet this deadline this June, and this next June 30th, July 1st, June 30th deadline, and actually invalidate what you did this year, if you're not careful. So that's what I mean by got it backwards. Now, I know that was a little bit of education in that, but I think that's important for you to know what motivated it, where it came from, and what it's done. Now, in summary, and I'd like to take a little bit of this liberty, if I may, Mayor. In summary, what it does, and I mentioned this to you before when I introduced the document to you about a month or so ago. When you really read all those different pieces in the statute, you get a lot of little bits and a lot of little details. But when you mold it together, you've all probably heard the saying that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Meaning if you add up all those little parts, you still don't really get the big picture. The big picture is much greater than the sum of the parts. You are accustomed to many, many years, decades, of having a degree of subjectivity at your disposal. If I walked in and I had a subdivision and I wanted to do a subdivision and y'all beat me up for 3 hours one night in a meeting to where I would surrender and do something in order to get the approval, that was the process. That was normal. Okay, y'all wanted me to make the park area bigger or the entrance different or something, right? The days are gone. That sum is greater than that whole is greater than the sum of the parts. What I mean by that is the real control has now shifted away from that project specific basis. When you really take all those different things and you figure out what they all mean and you mash them together, it really means that zoning map that you were referring to earlier, Mr. Morgan, is really the key decision-making piece for you. Because the new standards, of course, require you to spell things out more clearly, spell out your process more clearly. Planning boards can't do anything that's not stated in the ordinance specifically. In other words, they can't hold a developer to a standard that's 1 inch different than what the ordinance says Kyle can do. So it really means nothing for them to even vote on things like that. In fact, it's dangerous probably for them to vote on things like that. So we've taken that away. Now they would provide input to staff. What do they think about it? What do they see? What are they concerned with? And then he can take that, work with the developer, and then get to the finish line with the specifications.
So basically, what you wind up with is everybody's operating out of the same playbook.
That's exactly
So
right, which has
There's
its
no
advantage.
surprises, the developer comes in, says, I need to do this. He can look through everything so that there's, he won't be jerked around later on after he starts a project. And to the people that own the land or the property, whatever, they're not surprised by something that the developer builds.
That's exactly right. It's much more spelled out up front. Now, what that means, though, is that we write the standards and specifications around what they need to do to perform. So, because I can tell you, and Kyle and I had this conversation, Mr. Harris and I had this conversation earlier, that I can pick up an old ordinance and I can read through it, and in a short while I can usually find where fear entered the room. I'll be reading along and I'll find relatively straightforward information, and then suddenly there's all this detail to react to something. Oh my God, I can, I know what y'all's are. When I saw that reading yours, solar farms, boy, that took a lot of committee work. Solar farms must have terrified this town at one point in time, and because of the detail, but it's wonderfully crafted detail. But I can tell where the fear emerged. You got your first solar farm. Are we ready for this? Do we have what we need in the future if something more comes to town? So I can see that. So we don't write around fear now. We write around opportunity, and we take all the stuff that we normally are concerned with, and it fits into two categories. One is what we call our special uses. That's the second half of Article 10. Those special uses are the things like the asphalt plant or the solar farm or anything that people get upset about, generally upset about, and genuinely upset about. Certain types of industry, certain types of land uses do that to people. Cell towers, all, you know. When I first moved here, the scariest thing on the block was they were big and round, called satellite dishes. And they were big. Anybody remember the big ones?
Yeah.
They were like 8, and 10, and 12 feet in diameter. And the FCC even got, Federal Communications Commission got involved in that. So, long story short, we've categorized all of those things that are typically the scary stuff. And then we've tried to not slam the door on other things, but to go in and write. And this is part of the training that we will work on, to try to write to where things are more, they fit neater into buckets. Your old ordinance had fewer uses listed, and case law basically said that if I came up with something, let's say I came up with a, I don't know, pets doing funny tricks business, and it was not spelled out, pets doing funny tricks businesses in your ordinance, that you had to come to the closest thing, which might be, I don't know, a veterinarian's place, or, you know, a kennel, or something like that. So you had to force fit it in there. Well, that's dangerous. So we've added far more uses detailed in your tables and charts. So it gives your staff more neatly defined places for everything to fall into. Otherwise, we're running from trends. We're chasing or running from or running towards trends. So is Uber spelled out in here? No. That's ride hailing. Is Airbnb spelled out? That's short-term rental. What it's called Airbnb is an app that you locate, book, and pay. It's not a land use. You don't walk outside and go, wow, I'm going to build me an Airbnb, and you're building a house. You're not building an Airbnb. You might choose to post it on Airbnb. Just like you in the old days would post it in the apartments for rent or house for rent of the Salisbury Post. So it's really no different. So we try to write around having those neat little compartments. Now, between that use table and those special uses, we feel like we've got all of the different kinds of concerns covered. If someone has, and a common theme is density. If someone has a concern over density, you change the density. You state the density that you feel like will work. If someone has a concern over a type of development, you change the use type. So it becomes a fairly simple numeric exercise or table exercise, but don't rip all the content out of it. You've got an Achilles heel here. A good kind of problem to have. And it's that huge historic district. You've got a bigger contiguous historic district than any big city in the state, much less little town. And that's a great thing, but it's also going to be a challenge. When we crafted our districts to deal with that transitional district, looking at densities, you want to be careful because you know that the historic provisions are going to catch the design side in the historic area. If you apply that transitional zone in an area that just evolved before zoning but doesn't have historic preservation protections, then you have to look at the realities. Okay? You have to look at the realities. If I was in the historic district and I wanted to convert a house into 3 apartments, as long as you can't tell them from the outside, The use table would allow you to do that, but you wouldn't be able to tell it from the outside, right? Because the historic district preservation stuff is gonna take care of that building for you. If you're in an area outside the historic district, then you could vary the architecture, you could vary the style, you could vary the design, but by the time you meet all of the criteria, you're probably not gonna get anything near what people might be concerned with. And I have this come up all the time, common question. Well, what about this density in Sanford right now? What about this density in our downtown transition area around the downtown area? And I said, well, if you can find the property in that area, you could do a building with 8 units in it. But that's the cutoff for that district. If you're doing townhomes, you've got to have a footprint with frontage, because all of them have to front on public street. So if you wanted to get 6 or 8 units, you're probably talking about a couple of 100 feet of street frontage, which means you might be talking 3 houses worth of property, which is not really realistic. Okay. The numbers aren't there. The location dynamics, when weighed against the location economics, don't work. The dynamic is the frontage. It's the corner or a street front or a lot depth or lot width or any number of factors. And the location economics are, does it make sense to buy $1 million worth of property to turn around and create $1 million worth of townhomes? Why would you go through that process? You follow me? So we put the tools in the toolbox, but you've got to learn to use and master those tools in the toolbox in order for you to take advantage of some of the things that I heard stated earlier, which is to be able to protect what you want to protect, and then also kind of work with the trends of the future. Where else would my 125-year-old great-grandmother live if she couldn't mow grass anymore? She can't do the old house thing. Does she have an option here, or does she have to move to Salisbury? You follow me? So it's about creating opportunities. If you don't want those opportunities, change the zoning map, or either change the zoning table. You can always restrict it with the zoning table. Okay? So you got the tools in the toolbox with slight amendments, if that's what you want to do. But I would caution you against bucking the trends that boomers, empty nesters, young adults, young families are all looking for in community. Walkability, being close to work, energy efficiency, some modernization. I'm not talking about the historic area, but outside of the historic area, some modernization. You have to remember, we can't always do it as to what I would live in. Would I live in every single thing? Not necessarily. But there are people that do want to live in things that are different than me. There are people that are different than I am. And so I'm going to caution you to make sure that you remember when you are looking at your community that we are creating opportunities for our citizens, homeowners, citizens, renters. All of that is one piece. Our business community. So I can go 2 blocks away and eat lunch and get my hair cut. Natural resources. Can't have all tree cutting and no tree hugging. We have to have natural resources, protecting our water and land qualities. The 4th one is leadership, which includes yourselves, your appointed boards, staff members, everybody that works in leadership. And 5th, are those looking to invest in your community. They may be local people, and they may not be local people. But if you strive to create a 5-win scenario, I think you'll be pleased with the outcome, because the tools in the toolbox are here. The tools are set to create a positive outcome and not unintended consequences. I've spent my career building an ordinance approach that doesn't yield the goofy outcomes. So if you start tampering, keep me in the loop. I will shoot straight with you. I will let you know what you might not see. Okay, I will let you know what you might not see in there. With that said, I wanted to give you that overview of how your role is shifting and how the planning and zoning board role is shifting and how staff's role is shifting. And that's the bottom line of what 160D does, is it brings it around to written, stated standards and specifications and clear procedure. In fact, the state statute not only says your rules of procedure for your appointed boards have to be on your website, they go so far as to describe what happens if you don't have a website. That you have to partner with another jurisdiction to make them available on somebody else's. Like if East Spencer had a website and you didn't have a website, we get them to let us have a page on their website. That's how adamant the new 160D is about making everything transparent. What the written standard is and what it is that you want it to be. And that is actually what stimulates economic development. I know that was lengthy, but I think it was an important overview for you.
Thank you very much. So with that, Sam, I know you have a few more questions. Do other board members have questions at this time too?
Yeah, I'll wait.
Okay.
Several people have asked me, and this applies to things that were done before this, new proposal takes place. In terms of, and specifically in the booklet on page 6, Spencer Development Ordinance Article 2 regarding fencing. I have a neighbor. Here's the example. Neighbor builds a chain link fence that's approximately 5 feet high, 6 feet high, right on the property line that abuts 2 adjacent properties, both on the, because he has a corner lot. Now, reading this, going through here and reading this, it appears that in terms of fence setbacks, there should be at least a minimum of 4 feet in terms of the fence setback. Now,
That's to the right, that's to a street right away, not a property line.
okay, property lines, so the fences could be on the property line or within, within a certain limited space of the property.
Correct. The ordinance calls for there to be a permit on fences. And I recommend in my draft fee schedule that it be a no cost, a zero cost permit, because the whole idea is for them to be able to consult with your staff, because there are so many little nuances with fences. There could be a utility easement on the property and a fence being put up. If the sewer crew has to come through there, they're going to take it out of the way and they're not going to slow down. So it always helps for us to be able to make sure that we're looking at that. I've called Lowe's personally, and because they would put up a fence right across the sewer easement in somebody's yard. The homeowner doesn't know about a lot of that sort of thing. So, and told them, I said, listen, that's not going to work, and they give them a refund and get it down and everything else. Your new ordinance doesn't call for sewer easements on people's individual property, by the way. So new subdivisions won't ever have that problem. Too bad your old one allowed that problem to happen. A second aspect is we want to consult with that property owner about how far off the property line they really should work. If they're doing a chain link fence and what have you, they could probably work about 6 inches off the property line. If they're doing something that's maybe larger post style or got some more ornate aspects to it, they might want to be a little bit further off. And the reason for that we don't just say setback, is that technically that fence should be on their property. It shouldn't be on the line. Don't come out and dig your hole on my property, would be my philosophy if I live next door and somebody were wanting to put something up. So the opportunity to sit down with staff and just get clarity to what happens. Now, we also have some requirements in the front yard versus the rest of the yard, so that you don't have really bad looking stuff in the front yard. We put limitations on some of the obvious. Some people think that, well, why did you even have to say that? Nobody would do that. Well, I can show you pictures. Yes, razor wire in a residential area. I can show you photographs. So yes, we spell out some basic parameters, and we encourage that if you're gonna have wire in the front yard, that maybe you've got something decorative with it to scale it back. Now, an existing situation, when it was already constructed, it is what it is. This is not retroactive. Now, if they were to install something new, that would need to meet the ordinance.
Okay. Another question, on page 17, again, Article 2, regarding manufactured home parks prohibited.
Correct.
If manufactured home parks are indeed prohibited, then why is the old Melville Motor Court, which is now Norfolk Crossing, allowed to continue? The structures are about the fourth of the size of a mobile home. And it's, right now it's zoned on the new map, C-29, US Highway 29 Commercial District.
The way this works, and it sounds like a little bit of a convoluted way to get there, but first thing you gotta do to deal with problem mobile home parks, okay? And sometimes they can be problems. I'm a big believer that a well-done park is a good thing, but a lot of times they're poorly kept, poorly managed, poorly operated. So you start out by prohibiting them, and this is virtually word for word language that was first adopted in 1987 by municipalities in North Carolina. I started it that long ago. So that starts the clock running. They have a year and a half to bring it up to a basic set of standards, which appear on the next page. That are largely public safety related.
Right.
Something as simple as stop signs. You know,
Well,
a visitor might not even know they're about to run out into a road when there's not even a stop sign.
Right. Are you familiar with the property that I'm talking about?
I'm not, but let me walk you through the process.
Well,
If they
the
can
one
meet
thing,
that-
the one thing about these structures is they're basically what, Steve, about 12 by 12? They were
little bit bigger
originally
than that.
built long ago, I think in the late 20s, early 30s,
Right.
as a little motel unit, okay?
I mean, I've
Now-
seen it, but I've not
Now we
inspected.
have people actually living there and have been living there for a long, long time.
That's a
And-
minimum housing code thing then.
Yeah.
But if it is a manufactured home, we'd have
No,
to look at.
it's not, there's concrete block buildings,
Yeah,
basically.
no, this does not affect that at all.
Okay.
But your minimum housing code should address the condition in those dwellings. And you probably have
Okay.
one because you've had CDBG grants in the past, which required you to adopt a minimum
That's
housing
county.
code. Because you
Is
can't
it county?
raise somebody's housing standard if you don't have a standard. So
Okay.
you have a minimum housing code. And chances are you could look at it under the minimum housing code.
Okay.
There's also property maintenance codes that apply to non-residential properties. And you probably have that too. We used to call them commercial maintenance codes in another state, and North Carolina always has to change the name.
They would probably be described closer as tiny homes.
And
Like a tiny
Yeah,
house.
just a little bit. That's
Yeah.
the first, tiny homes.
if it's a maintenance
They're still
issue,
small.
then your housing code is going to be, and your nuisance related codes like overgrown or junk cars, and, because usually where there's one problem, there's usually several of those kind of problems. you
They
know?
re-roofed them this week.
Yeah.
I saw them.
I mean, the new owners at this property have really improved. I mean, it's not greatly improved, but it has improved.
It
Well,
has improved.
That's
I mean, it's
really
not
good to
an
hear
eyesore.
because housing alternatives are important. They
Yeah.
really are an important factor. And having those opportunities for them, but you doing your job and making sure that they're at least kept to a decent
It's
standard of
standard.
living
Sure.
is the important job that the town can carry out. So anyway, to go back to the manufactured home park, just so that you know, we've got this provision in here to deal with any bona fide manufactured home park to bring it up to a minimum standard or it goes away. For anything new, like if someone wanted to develop a new one, you've got an overlay district, which would require a rezoning. And what did I say? The official zoning map is the key control. If you
Yeah.
don't want them,
Yeah.
don't. But I got news for you folks, the new statute, and I just want to point this out. This is important, very important. My job is to keep you from getting in trouble, right?
Yeah.
Just make sure you're compliant, right? So I'm going to go over here and I'm gonna read from the statute for just a moment here so that you know why these tools are in the toolbox. There's 3 tools. Fixing up old mobile home parks. There's provisions for creating new ones, but you've gotta go through a lot of stuff and nothing's zoned for them right now. And the third is replacing existing ones. So give me just a minute here and let me get to that because I think this warrants a moment of special attention. And you seldom hear this in the middle, especially in the 9th article, halfway through the 9th article. The 10th section of the 9th article begins with the General Assembly finds that manufactured housing offers affordable housing opportunities for low and moderate income residents of the state who could not otherwise afford to own their own home. The General Assembly further finds that some local governments have adopted zoning regulations that severely restrict the placement of manufactured homes. It is the intent of the General Assembly in enacting this section that local governments re-examine their land use practices to assure compliance with applicable statutes and case law and consider allocating more residential land area to manufactured homes based upon local housing needs. That's why you have the tools in here, because the General Assembly and the governor said address it. So you've got the tools in here. You get to pick where they go. You get to set the volume or the throttle on that. But at least you've got the tools. You're not just outright saying, well, we don't allow them in our town. You follow me? So that's very important. And they can be done well. There are many more standards to the new park than what you see on that page 18 of Article 2 on existing parks. So if somebody were to develop a new, you did approve a rezoning for that, and they did do that kind of project, there's 35 standards, 37 standards. And they're in a part on new development. This Article 2, Alderman Morgan, that you're reading from, I find it interesting that you picked that one out. That's the article that really deals with, I already live here, already have my house. Now what? Driveways, fences, outbuildings, things like that. That's why I put that up near the front. That's common site triangles. I got this big old shrub out the end of the driveway. It's blocking the stop sign. That's the article that really affects people that are already settled in. All this other stuff is really about the youth. Okay?
All right, thank you.
Other questions, Sam?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Bish?
The flow.
Yes, sir.
When I came here tonight, I thought there was gonna be a mob of people in this room, so I started wearing my mask. Because generally, when you introduce the zoning into a community, there's usually opinions, a lot of different opinions. The low amount of comments, I can probably attribute either because nobody really knew about this hearing coming up, even though it was advertised, or because of the size of the volume of material that they would have to look through would be so overwhelming for them that they figured they didn't care. Or 3, because they trust us to make the right decision for the town in regards to this plan. So I don't know what the real reason is. I've been talking to Kyle recently, and Kyle indicated that he was going to have a statement of staff in regards to density. Do you have that?
So I'll give everyone an update on the density analysis. So during our small group UDO discussions, I think the week prior to the last week, the major concern that I heard among the governing board was about density. Particular, how the new RMST district, which encompasses most of our core neighborhoods, how the new ordinance allows more housing types, attached housing, townhomes, multifamily up to 8 units. And one of the major concerns that I heard was that 16 units per acre may be too intense of a density for our historic neighborhoods. And so what I've done is I've started a project which is not completed yet. I've begun a density analysis using, as a matter of fact, Google SketchUp to create three-dimensional virtual representations of our neighborhoods to scale to show y'all what are some different development scenarios that could play out. And you know, some people think Google SketchUp is a gimmick, but I think it's very useful to illustrate scale, dimensions, mass, how buildings relate to each other, how new development relates to existing development. And so that project is ongoing, so I don't have a report to provide tonight. What I can say, and I think Mr. Flo may be able to provide some additional detail on this, during my investigation of how the new UDO will impact density in our historic neighborhoods, what you find is that 16 units per acre, that may sound like a lot, that may sound like too much. But when you actually begin to look at parcels, individual 50-foot lots, or maybe a recombination of a 50-foot lot with an adjacent 75-foot lot, or maybe a combination of 3 lots, what you find is that when you have to meet the minimum width requirements for, let's say, townhomes, you have to meet the width requirements, you have to meet the height requirements, which is, I believe, 25 feet. You have to meet parking requirements, rear-loaded parking requirements. Driveways are typically 12 feet. So when you look at a development as a whole, what you find is that, okay, 16 units per acre, that sounds like maybe too much. When you actually see how that plays out, you game through the different scenarios, what you find is you're not actually going to get 16 units. You're maybe going to get 8 or 6 units townhomes on a lot, even though the ordinance allows 16 units per acre. And so what I think will be useful, and I can provide this to you simply given the time constraints, I wasn't able to provide it tonight, but what I can provide for y'all is a visual density analysis using a virtual model of our neighborhoods to show you what will be allowed in the RMST district using this new ordinance. And so that will be forthcoming. I know we're on an impossibly accelerated timeline with June 8th coming up next week. That's the date for adoption. My general thought is that perhaps what we could do is, if the board is comfortable with the UDO in general, even if you have lingering concerns about density, I might recommend adopting the UDO with an effective date of July 1st, and then after June 8th, between June 8th and July 1st, that gives staff additional time to do a more comprehensive density analysis that plays through all the different scenarios, and we can provide that to y'all to see how that works. What you find is that when you're gaming out development scenarios, you can't just do one, you have to do, 20, 30 different scenarios to show you the full scale of what's possible. So say, for instance, you want to do townhomes, well, what could you achieve on a 50-foot lot? What could you achieve on a 200-foot lot? What if there is rear access through an alley? You have to play through these different scenarios to get a clear understanding of what's possible. And so I'm hoping we can provide that to y'all, but Mr. Flo may be able to speak more specifically on how density may not be as big of a concern as I think what I heard.
Okay, I appreciate that, and in regards to your suggestion, it sounds fair. The 16 units is for those attached units, and it's only 7 for detached single family.
That's right.
I don't see anywhere in Spencer where we probably would even get to 16 units. You gotta take out all the open cuts of the runoffs and all that stuff, and like you said, with the alleyways and so forth, unless you're gonna wrap those into the total acreage plan or whatnot. I don't know how you're gonna count those, if they're gonna be counted or whatnot. So I came here prepared to talk about density, but I was waiting to see if in fact there was any outcry in regards to it. And with the one comment from the lady that's in the audience, it seems like it may not be an issue in Spencer.
The reality on in the RMST area, and we intentionally limit that to areas that are largely already, the pattern's already there. Your lots are there, houses are there, everything's kind of there. But we speak in terms of units per acre because that is a density rule. But let's suppose I had a quarter acre lot in that area. Well, and I could meet all the other dimensional criteria, I could get 4 units. So that's a more realistic project. If I could meet that, I might need a corner lot to be able to do that, and it might need to be just the ideal one, a certain depth, a certain width, and things like that. So there might be very few where I could actually even go all the way up to that cap. If you didn't want to take that chance, you can adjust that, but I would not go below about 12, or else you may find yourself actually counterproductive to trying to get reinvestment in the existing areas where you've already got street infrastructure and water and sewer and everything.
Well, I know in the words of Joe Morris, it's all about the numbers. So not seeing the type of feedback that I thought that we were going to be getting tonight, I just wanted to look at some of the other reasons why would you explain in regards to the legal and the legal ramifications as far as why we have to do the procedural ramifications, why we have to do that. But I'm wondering if we're getting into a situation where we're talking about build it and they will come type of theory about if you provide enough housing that you're going to be able to build a bigger town. And I don't know about that because first, I'm not seeing where we're talking about demand-driven housing, especially with a lot of the other features not in place, like commercial businesses established, transportation to move the people around, parking that will accommodate all of the additional housing that you would like to put into Spencer. I don't see I'm trying to understand who are we building the town for? Because if you build it to attract additional housing, you're not talking about the current residents of Spencer who are looking to change their housing. You have a population of roughly 60% seniors in Spencer. Maybe they would like to downsize, but a lot of them are not going to leave their homes. You got a lot of military. A lot of them are so used to being where they are, they're not really going anywhere. The fact that there's at least 40% of our housing is not occupied by the owner, so you have a very transient community where a lot of our problems that we've had in code enforcement has been with owners who don't live in Spencer. So I'm just trying to understand if you have a high demand for increase in density to 7 units and 16 units attached housing, multifamily. I know there are some multifamily units currently in Spencer. Fine, those could have been grandfathered in, under any new regulations, so forth. But who are you building? In fact, the question is not for you, Rick.
Okay.
The question is for the town. Who are we building it for? And how are we resolving some of the problems that we have in the existing town the way it is now. So my question is to the board, for their comments, and if you feel that you're trying to build a new town or build a new city, or you're trying to cater to the needs of the town that you have and the people who are contributing to the meager tax base that we have to work with. And if we're looking to improve their life and the struggles that they've had living in this town, or who are you building it for? That's all I want to know.
So I'm going to take a stab at this by saying I don't know that we're trying to build a town for anybody, because we have a town already. We're trying to make Spencer the best community that we can for our current residents and any future residents that we might have, as well as our current businesses and future businesses. So, as Mr. Flo has stated, this is a tool, and it's a tool that we use so that we don't have to be subjective in how, when somebody wants to come and build a fence, a current resident, we don't have to be subjective in that. It's spelled out. When a developer wants to come in, we don't have to be subjective about it. So I don't know that this is a tool for us to build our town. You've heard tonight, there's no desire to annex or anything like that. We've got enough work cut out for us in our town right now, as it is, that this is going to allow us to do that. So I'm not sure where the thought that we're trying to build and grow, and we're trying to build our economic base. Yes, absolutely. We've got to grow our tax base to be able to provide the services that our citizens want and need. But I don't think I've heard anybody on this board say that we want to grow. I think what I've consistently heard is we want to make better opportunities for our current residents. We want to be able to make sure that we find ways to save our historic housing stock, and that we're providing recreational opportunities for our residents and those that are visiting our town, that we're providing places to eat, that we're providing the basic services that our residents have asked for.
Right.
That's what I've heard from our board, and it has nothing to do with building and trying to grow. I think this group likes, from what I've gathered, we like the community feel, the small town, and what we keep saying, we want to make Spencer a model small town for all of North Carolina. And that small town's important.
We want it to grow the right way. If we do grow, we don't want any more mistakes. Because no offense to boards in the past, I'm not saying anything about it. Everybody makes mistakes. There's been mistakes in the past, but like you said, this is the tool. So hopefully, if it's enforced properly, we won't have these problems.
Right.
Knock on wood.
And Bob, to your point about the minimum or the density issues, if 16 is a concern, let's talk about a different number. I mean, is it 12?
If you look at the lot sizes in that area, and that's what we do, we look extensively. That's why if you'll look at the table, this is in Article 8, it's on page 12. We call for a 12-foot minimum front street setback for the principal structure. So in the table at the top of page 12, in Article 8, page 12.
What chapter are you in?
Article 8, tab 8, page 12. That's all your districts. And on page 12, that table up at the top where it says minimum front street setback is the third column. It says it's 12 to the principal structure. That's a number that we went out and field verified. You've got a lot of houses that are built around 14 feet from what appears to be the right of way, which is roughly about a foot behind the power pole, a foot towards the street from the power pole. Power poles are usually a foot outside the public right of way. Now that's a loose standard. You've got a ton of houses that are built at about 14 feet. If we had a bigger setback than that, if we were guessing and said 30, which is what a lot of towns did, they go throw new development setbacks in old parts of town. Now suddenly you've got a house that if it has a major storm damage or fire damage, like I saw up here, it's a total loss. If it exceeds 50%, it's a total loss. And is that really what you're trying to do? So no, so we've gone to great lengths to make sure that this works. Now, if you look at the lot sizes in that area, they vary all over the board. And that's part of what makes those, I call them the BZ area, the before zoning area, the area that really evolved long before zoning. We have to kind of look at what a fairly typical lot is in there, and you'll see a lot of land increments were done in those days that were 25 feet wide. When somebody plat out land, they platted out 25, 25, 25, and somebody might come along and buy 2 of those and have a 50, or might buy 3 of those and have a 75. They weren't separate lots. They were little increments or slithers of land before the modern subdivision regulations were developed in North Carolina. So you've got a lot of property that's around that size in width, 50, 75. In some cases, as in where I grew up with my grandparents, my grandmother and her neighbor that was buying the lots next door split one. So we had 2.5, and the ladies next door had 2.5 lots. So it was 62.5 feet wide was our lot that we lived in, our house in town. When you look at a piece of property like that at 4 units per acre, 16 units per acre, you're talking about something in the neighborhood of maybe 1/4 of an acre of property at best, depending on the depth of it. At 60 feet wide, it would need to be almost 200 feet deep, about 190 plus feet deep to be 1/4 of an acre. So for them to be able to put 4 units on that, with the minimum width being 16 feet, would be virtually impossible. But if it's a corner lot, it would not be impossible, because they could rotate down the long, deep side. You follow me? So if you drop below the 16, you're going to basically take the corner lots, which is the best place for something like this, out of the equation. So we don't, all due respect to the comment about picking numbers, I don't pick numbers. We determine numbers and calculations of what work. These are buildable standards and specifications. I'm holding in my hand your current R8 test sheet. And if you just go to your R8 district and you look up the numbers, you come up with, right now in your R8, 3.36 dwellings per acre in your R8.
How many?
3.36 in your R8. And that's detached houses with side setbacks and everything. But there were enough hidden time bombs ticking in your ordinance to where we ran a second one as we discovered the hidden stuff in the red on this page. I'm trying to think of a nice word. Bear with me. I can't think of a nice word for this. Alderwoman Sledge has heard me say it before in a planning board meeting, but it's a lie. The R8 district is a lie. This is the real reality. Your R8 yields 2.24 dwellings per acre. Do you know why you're not getting any investment? Why nobody's looking at doing anything in your town? It's your current ordinance. It tells 2 stories. I don't ever have 2 pages for the same district test. It's like a calculus exercise. This is what your ordinance says if you look at the easy stuff. When you look at where things were hidden, where the tripwires are, where the bamboo shoots are, it's like the jungle in Vietnam. See that red? That's how much was hidden information and it changed the outcome. So we don't make these numbers up. 16, you can change it, but we are guessing. We're picking a comfort food when we do that. And you're not paying me to tell you what you want to hear. Mayor, members of the board, forgive me for saying this, but you are paying me to shoot straight. I work for you to serve you. I'm not working for developers. I'm not working for any of those things. I'm working for you and your citizens. And I'm not going to just say, without making sure you hear me loud and clear, that if we start changing numbers, we're changing outcomes. And we may not necessarily be addressing the fears that you have. They may be unrealistic fears. And so, Alderman Bish, I hope I'm not being offensive in any way. It's certainly
No,
not
no.
intended.
No, I'm
It's
just
intended
wondering
to be
on,
completely straightforward with this board. and
Mr.
your
Flaw,
public.
I'm curious, what, could you give us an example out of those? Or is that, something for a later time?
Oh, out of the standards?
Yeah,
Well,
I'm curious.
you've got a relationship standard. So your minimum lot depth of 75, width of 75 feet. If I also meet your block length and width requirements, then I can't do a lot depth of 125 feet, which is what 8,000 square foot lot would yield at the minimum lot width of 75. That is a made up number. 75 feet of street frontage at an 8,000 square foot lot is not a real yield. You've got building envelope that's 3,000 square feet, 3,060 to be exact, if we go with the stated outcome. Okay? But because it forces the lot to be larger, it forces the lot to be 200 feet, in which case your 75 doesn't even work because you've got a width to depth ratio requirement of 40%. Your width cannot be less than 40% of your depth. So if you tell them that the lot is measured by 8,000 divided by 75, that's 125, and then you tell them, turning pages, you tell them somewhere else where it's got to be 200 feet deep, 40% of 200 is 80. So if I'm a developer that's looking at 100 acres over here off of Picker Road to do a new subdivision, and I start looking at these outcomes, I'm suddenly terrified. Your per lot development cost is almost $19,000. That's not land cost. That's street infrastructure. That's putting a road with water and sewer in front of that lot. Is $18,830 using numbers that are not necessarily accurate today because of what's going on in cost. But they're relative to each other. So we can take a different size lot and we can compare it to determine what your new one does. And just to give you a comparison, now this is not talking about the older parts of town, this is talking about the newer parts. But the SFR3, which replaces it, is a larger lot, 11,600 square feet with a 60-foot width, an actual depth of 193.3 feet, a per lot development cost of 17.6. I'm going to ask Mike to scroll for me. We're going to scroll till we see what looks like a couple of blocks. Keep going. Just keep going. I'm going to show you. There's your lies right there. Keep going. Whoa, right there. All right. I use R12 because of the misleading numbers in here come out closer to an R12 than actual R8. So I use R12 as a compromise. Now that's a block, depending on how you look at it. The top two rows of houses are divided by a street, so it's me looking across the street, Alderman Bish at your house. You're looking across the street at my house. In the lower two rows, you're looking at us back to back. So me and Alderman Morgan, we're backing up to each other so our grandkids can play out in the backyard. So that's there's 3 rows of houses, but you can look at the block either face to face or back to back. Now let's go to the next slide. And it's a longer block too. Under your new ordinance, that development cost, which is a couple of $1,000s, which is over 10% lower, actually gives you more cross streets. Notice the block's shorter from left to right. It's limited now to 900 feet. Notice the backyards are bigger. You can't use a side yard for much, but you can use a backyard. Okay, that's usable open space. Now go to the next slide. This is how the two compare. Now look at the numbers on the left. If we take your R8 and we say, well, because it's got some misleading information in it, we'll call it R12, you're looking at more acreage to develop the block, significantly more, almost 1 1/3 acres, more acreage to develop that one block, but you're looking at private open space that's almost 1/2 acre greater under the new ordinance. So what we're creating with the new ordinance, this is for new development, this is going out here and building a new subdivision, is we're creating a higher quality streetscape. That's the relationship between the houses face to face, creating a better quality private open space. That's the thing we call a backyard. We're moving our block length where it matches up with fire department criteria. When they roll out on a attack and they roll from a hydrant, under the bottom scenario, you can do a hydrant on each corner and you're done. All the way through the neighborhood. A hydrant on each corner and you're done. The one up top, you got to drop one mid-block here and there, so you end up with more coverage, which is more cost, which affects all kinds of stuff. It also has to go in somebody's yard. But there's all kinds of different aspects to this ordinance. So these numbers are very carefully determined and calculated.
Right, yeah, and I didn't mean to imply that these numbers are just picked out of space.
Well, I know you didn't imply that,
But I
well, I
know
did,
that
but
there,
that's not the way we would do it.
I know.
I want to caution you on picking numbers.
But I know that there are communities where some communities do not exceed like 12 units per acre in their towns and whatnot. But my question is on the I've seen the results of minimum lot size of 5,000 square feet in the RMST district, where the proposed RMST district, where you cannot take a car off the street, so you're very dependent on street parking for any of those houses. How can you keep a car off the street with a 5,000 square foot minimum lot?
Well, the ordinance speaks to, and that's mostly because you've got those right now. You've got lots out there that are 5, okay, in the RMST
Yeah,
area.
but why would you want to build that into the future?
Well, I mean, what you're doing is you're not creating nonconformities. Remember, we don't have a 20-acre tract of land out there where we're going to build into the future at 5,000 square foot lots. Okay, you've got 5,000 square foot lots out there today, and you've got houses on those. You've got houses that have little to no setback. If we use the grandfather clause too much, we're throwing those property owners under the bus. 20 years ago, it was very common for people to just say, well, it's grandfathered in, don't worry about it. However, there was a recession in 08, 9, 10, right? Dodd-Frank Act came out that basically went in and had major implications in the financial industry with lenders and also insurance companies, okay? And a big part of that was for them to manage their risk and exposure, because that's what had happened with the financial crisis in 08, 9, 10 was overextended, too much risk. You had a developer, you had to have 3 things to be a developer in 2006 or 7. You had to have a German car with a sunroof, a financial statement on file with the bank, and a cell phone. Everybody on your team had to be licensed. Real estate brokers, accountants, lawyers, surveyors, contractors, environmental scientists, engineers, you name it, everybody had a license except the one driving. And the way they would play this out is they would find available property. Land availability was driving growth in the mid 2000s. You saw it, you called it, Mr. Harris, and said, how's it zoned? He said, R8. You said, great. What does that mean? 8,000 square foot lots. Great. What's the width? 75. Okay, let me run these numbers. And they called the bank and said, I've run this on the back of the envelope. I think this will work. They're asking this much or that much for the land. Have you got my back, banker? And the banker would say, we got your back. You drive on by, just make sure your sunroof's open. We'll throw the money out the window. And that's how easy it was to be a developer. Well, Dodd-Frank pulled that back in, and they made land development, and I don't mean building buildings, I'm talking about putting in the infrastructure for subdivision, a speculative category. Because you could get a loan to buy a house. You could get a loan to build your Bojangles restaurant. But you could not get a loan to buy 40 acres and put in, 4,000 feet of streets, water, sewer to create lots to then turn around and sell to builders. So the development community took a hit. The very next thing that happened was those banks and the insurers started asking for zoning verifications. In your fee schedule, you've had for 40 or 50 years, probably a $5 for a zoning verification letter, or $10, or some ridiculous number. Zoning verification letter. So we get a call from somebody doing an appraisal, or somebody doing a closing on a loan or a house or whatever, refinance, insurance policy. In the old days, you'd say, well, yes, it's, non-conforming, but it's grandfathered in. It can be replaced up to this and that. And they just stuck it in the file. They said, well, we got the thing from the town, stick it in the file. They didn't read it. Those underwriters read them now. And I was doing this job for a small town in Cabarrus County, and I had somebody call trying to sell their house. Long story short, deal fell through because we couldn't give them a zoning verification letter on a utility building. A utility building. They built it without a permit. They built it over a sewer easement. And when we pointed that out, and it was in a floodplain, and when we pointed that out, they lost that sale. And nobody will underwrite that property. The only way those people are selling that house is to tear down the utility building. So it's become very important to look at those existing conditions.
Right. So, okay, I understand that these regulations should be used for what exists.
As
But-
well as the new.
Okay, but what I was gonna say is that, is there anything wrong with having old law, new law type of situations where you're not grandfathering each individual piece, but anything that was built prior to the beginning of this new zone and reg would be considered old law, and new law could increase your minimum lot size to 8,000 square feet or something like that. And you have old law, and everything would be relegated to old law. With, if they change something, if they do any substantial renovation or rehab or something like that, then it would come under new law. But if they're just changing windows or something like that, they're still under old law.
Well, they have that in, that is in
one.
160D now, but it's for a period only. It's called permit choice. And that's because of transition. That's the closest thing to it. The only thing that you could, that you could really do, because you have to set standards that treat everybody in that district the same. You follow me? That's clear. So
With it all covered by
so
these zones
no,
and law.
you couldn't do old law, new law. What you could do is you could say, okay, in this district, we're going to go back to the old standards and put them in that RMST district. And you could use your old R8 standards for that.
No, just
district.
the way you have SFR 1 and 2 and 3 and RMSC 1.
Right.
Each of those zones, they all would apply under the same standards. And you can have, I'm saying, just take a date. Take a date. A number, Joe. Take a date, the date of the enactment of this new law.
Right.
All those houses that are currently existing as they are now would be subject to old law, and anything that's substantially rehab or change or new would fall under new law.
Well, I think you're I think I know where you're going with that. Let me say it this way. If they're gonna change something, they have to do the new anyway. They don't have to change something that's already there. If they're already there, they're already there, and they are grandfathered in, but we just avoided creating nonconformities. So, you know, if you want to change the minimum lot size, that's just a change in the minimum lot size. That's not.
Say Farmer Brown, he has a house X, and it's the new law has already taken effect, but he fits under the old law. House X burns down. He wants to rebuild. He cannot rebuild under the old law. He has to rebuild under.
And that's the way. Yeah, that's the way they all are. Yeah,
Right.
that's what you've got now. The old, but so I don't know what how the old law would affect the old house then if they're not changing anything. Because if they're not changing anything,
No, I said he wants to rebuild.
right. But
The
what
house
I'm
burned down.
but what I'm saying is I don't think we need to keep old law, because the only time you would need any law is when they change something. See, this is about land development. It's not about the house that's already sitting there. But if you wanted to add on to the house, or it burned down and you want to rebuild it, then the new law would apply. But the old law essentially doesn't do anything for you if you're not changing something. If you're not adding or changing something, you're just already there. You're an existing building and an existing lot of record. I don't see where the old law would ever do anything if you had to go to the new law if you did something. So what would the old law actually even do?
Do I remember that we talked during this process about, if a house burned to the ground
Right.
and it was, more than 50% destroyed, and they wanted to build it back, they couldn't get financing for it because of some of these changes? Is that-
Well, no, they could get financing for it, but they would have to build it back to the new standard. Now, they can't get, the problem becomes if you've got a partial damage. Let's say you've got 50% or 60% of the house, but that's not all of it. And it's based on value, unfortunately. It's based on value. Well, quite often the replacement cost was far more than a certain value of the home. Let's say you've got a home that's valued at $80,000, the structure, not the land. The structure is valued at $80,000, and 60% of that is damaged. So you've now got, $45,000 worth of damage to an $80,000 structure. You have to tear the whole thing down and bring the whole thing back to compliance if it's non-conforming, meaning if it's under the grandfather clause. But if we go ahead and we fix it to where they are not, and we do that by setting these smaller setbacks, okay, those dimensional criteria that make more of the houses that are out there today conforming to the new law than were the day before, than they are today. Let me say it that way, than they are today. You've got houses out there right now that are non-conforming. We're going to make them conforming. They don't want to have to do a thing. They'll just sit there and magically become a conforming structure.
I'm trying to find a reason to go with this.
I know you just want to be, I'm trying to hang with you, Mr. Bishop. I'm trying to hang with you. I'm trying to answer you've got some really intriguing questions. You're challenging me pretty good. And I'm not trying to talk you into it. I'm just trying to talk you into not guessing it.
No, I'm trying to work with my board,
I understand.
and I think we have one of the best boards that I've seen governing in a long time. And I'm trying to get to a positive 6-0 vote on this, so.
May I make another comment about something? If most of your new development or multifamily is probably going to be targeting one of the mixed use districts, because that's the one for new development, really. If you were going out on somewhere and want to
RMST?
rezone.
Yeah.
No, sir. If you were going to go somewhere, let's get out of the
Oh,
RMST area.
Oh,
If
okay.
somebody was coming to town and wanted to do some apartments, they would come see y'all about a mixed use one or two. And it limits your single family attached, which is townhomes, to 12 units. Okay, which is what I said was, kind of as far down as I would go in the RMST, but I'm a little bit scared of that because you're working in that old fabric. Lot sizes are what they are. That's an example. If you had a clean sheet of paper, 12 units an acre is about right, because you might be doing 15 acres of them. But in the RMST, you might be doing a third of an acre of a townhome project. You follow me? And that's where I think the 16 comes into play. It's going to actually make it work out. You're not going to get 16 units. You're going to get 3 or 4. If you fall back to 12, you're more apt to get 3. Now you've sort of taken away the incentive to do anything to create that housing product in the older parts of town, which is reinvestment. In some areas, it's warranted. In some areas, the house that's there should be fixed up. So I just wanted to point that out to you, though, that 12 is sort of the benchmark for new development on townhouses, and 16 for that kind of infill, because you're not usually talking about developing a whole acre. You're usually talking about developing just a very small portion of an acre. Okay? And the setbacks are smaller, so you can do more with a smaller piece.
So, Mr. Bish, I guess one of the things I think with the density piece that you've raised a concern about, I guess, can you express for the board, and I know you've experienced some pretty significant density in New York when you were there. You obviously have a vision of what that could become. Could you share with the board what that vision looks like? Vision, nightmare, whatever it is, and maybe Mr. Flo can talk through that.
No, there's some places in New York that are built properly, and there are some places where density was abused, and it created a situation where people were climbing up all over each other just to walk down the street. I mean, there was no open space, and you got to remember, New York, they also have very few height restrictions in certain areas, so sunlight is gone, and very few one-family low-rise buildings. And when you tend to, density can work. Density is not a bad word if you have all the accoutrements to work with it. If you have transportation, if you have the economic drivers, I mean, you're not going to draw people into Spencer, or you're not going to even get a lot of individuals who live in Spencer now to appreciate what's going on, unless they can see changes that work for them. If they don't see any, you can build 100 houses, and if you don't have any stores for them to go to, you got one laundromat. They're not going to appreciate, all this building that you're doing, that all the money that you may get for community block development grants to build housing and so forth. If you don't have transportation systems, you don't have food shops, places that you can't get a cup of coffee overnight. I mean, there's a lot of things that go with it. And as far as the walkability factor, well, there's a lot of people that's my age or a little, well, not exactly my age, but they can't walk. They have to drive to get somewhere, and they're not gonna walk 5-6 blocks to get a cup of coffee or a Dunkin' Donuts or something like that. They're gonna drive, and when they come back, they want to be able to put their car somewhere instead of fighting their neighbor for the spot in front of their house. They want to take their car and put it on their property and not worry about it. So density it can work if you do everything else right. You have to provide areas for little mini parking areas, or at least an alleyway between houses and stuff like that. Well, you have it in SFRs a lot, but in some of the other districts, you really don't have it. And unless somebody's building, and if someone's building a 8-unit structure or whatnot, you got to demand that they put in at least one parking space per unit that they put in there. So it shouldn't be a big thing. If you're building a new house, you should be able to provide parking for the individuals in that household. And don't say just leave it on the street. You may want to go to somewhere where you can just take cars off the street overnight and clean the streets or something like that, you know, so.
If I could ask, and this is more of a question directed to Mr. Flo, my understanding of the new ordinance is that it requires for each unit that has 3 bedrooms, you need to have 2 parking spots for that unit. Is that correct?
What district is that?
These are attached, this is all, for dwellings, multifamily, 2 bedrooms or less, 1 per unit, 3 bedrooms or more, 2 per unit is the minimum, and there's a maximum of 2, where there's 1, there's a maximum of 3 where there's 2. Single family attached, which is townhomes, which is largely what we've been talking about in the RMST, has a minimum of 1 per unit if it's 2-bedroom unit. If it's a 3-bedroom unit, it's a minimum of 2 spaces. These are off-street spaces. It requires the access from the rear, so it's all in there. We don't let that off the hook at all. Now, it's not based on district, it's based on what we refer to as building and lot type. So if you're doing detached residential versus attached residential versus multifamily. Multifamily is apartment or condominium. We can't set our standards based on who owns it. Okay, whether it's rented or purchased.
Right.
So multifamily and on down the line with that. Multifamily is the same ratio. We do let them off the hook a little bit if it's an age-restricted community, where there might be a few fewer vehicles. So we go with a 0.75 per unit. They're
Right.
not gonna put in a small parking space, they're gonna put in whole ones if they want them. But that's as a minimum with 1.5 as a maximum, so we're not overdoing the visitor parking and things like that. But that's all in there, that's all in the parking standards. Let me point out something too for you, that I think is critically important. And that is that the whole notion of building the town is quite simple. I grew up in a Presbyterian church in Greenwood, South Carolina, and in Sunday school, when I was a little boy, I was taught that God created chickens or people. And so when I became an adult and I was posed with the question of which came first, chickens or eggs, I said, well, chickens. In community building, that's people. So people first. I hear a lot of towns say, well, we need to be out recruiting Chick-fil-A and Dunkin' Donuts and Starbucks or whatever. And I'm like, no, you don't. You need to be getting investment in your residents. Invest in creating a livable place, a livable community. The businesses will be there. You've got a wonderful opportunity close into your downtown where the actual attached stuff should happen. Okay, you've got this giant square up here that really needs to be rethought. There, I said it. It needs to be rethought. It became what it became in a very car-centric era where the shopping center had as much parking in front of it as you could want. Well, that's not there. Younger people are gonna want to walk 2 blocks because they're not gonna go out to dinner and eat food and have a beverage, adult beverage, and then want to drive. They're gonna want, so where your opportunities are for your attached and your multifamily and things of that is right in the middle of downtown. You increase the number of chickens in the middle of town and they're gonna lay the golden eggs. You're not gonna have to want for the restaurant or the coffee shop or any of that. It is going to immediately happen. Walking downtown Kannapolis, North Carolina, where I live and work, we didn't recruit any of those businesses except the brewery they contacted the city, but the apartments and the townhomes were encouraged. There's 120 townhomes under construction across the street from my office now. You haven't seen it since they actually started. And there are 296 apartments that are now open, both within 2 blocks of each other with 2 churches sitting in between it. And everything in the downtown, except up on Main Street, because they've not released those buildings for occupancy yet, everything else filled up immediately. Every one of those storefronts, clothing shops, men's hair, women's hair, spa, coffee and next to it a bakery. And in the coffee shop, they put a roll-up window. So you come out of the bakery with your thing and get your coffee. And I mean, just, it just happened. So the businesses that you want for your citizens are counting rooftops and they're counting traffic counts and they're looking at income. If you want your town to survive, you've got to replenish your population. You've got to have an opportunity for young people to want to settle here. And that will bring those restaurants and those choices that everybody can enjoy.
Right, because since I've been here, I've been looking for where are the young folk. No, I'm serious. I don't see the young folk here. I don't see. Otherwise, there would have been a lot of parks and kids running out in the streets and playing in the streets. I don't see a lot of young folk here.
That's because only a few of them want a 100-year-old house.
But
Yeah.
but truth be told, the new houses that we're seeing going on 50-foot lots, they've been selling to young couples.
Okay.
And a young family just bought up the street from me.
It's kind of a gradual.
All right. So
Yeah,
we,
it's not gonna
gonna
happen
we got 10 or
overnight.
12.
This ain't New York, it's Spencer.
And I think another key is, that because things are so developed in the southern area of Rowan County, things are gonna move in this direction, and we're gonna have more stuff happening in the northern section, and we're gonna have more businesses, we're gonna have more opportunities for places for people to work, and they're gonna wanna have a place to live.
A council member in Kannapolis once asked me, his name was Kenneth Gathers, and he was mayor pro tem for a number of years, and his son actually went into the public administration arena, Kenneth Gathers Jr. And Ken Gathers was a fantastic council member down there for about 20 years, and I had done a growth projection and model, and it was the basis for our new ordinances and the basis for involuntary annexation at the time, where we were going to extend our water and sewer and reserve areas for employers and all that. And Kannapolis at the time in the late 1980s was 5 miles tall and about 1.5 miles wide. And 85 sort of skirted by one side of it. I'm drawing it backwards for you. It's over there. Okay. And in this little study I presented, and this was in the good old days. This is back when you could do this kind of thing in executive session. And I laid it out, and they saw this rectangle. North was still north. The city still had this, but it had grown this way. It couldn't grow this way because it had Landis and China Grove sitting up there. Couldn't grow this way, had Concord sitting there. So it grew this way. And Ken and I bumped into each other a few years ago, and he said, wow. He said, with what's going on here now, he said, that was so true. So I think a big difference between Alderman Bishop, between your vision and my vision is my job is to respect what's here today, but to prepare you for what's not here today and what is likely over that horizon. And so I just want you to know where the different perspective, I've got a little different lens that I'm looking through as I think about it, and it drives my wife crazy. We can't go anywhere without me seeing it through the other lens, and so I think you're right, as long as we're thinking about people who are here today. I think we have to also remember that we're trying to create the right mechanism. So if I lived in my house 50 years and I put it on the market for sale, and somebody said, well, that house is going to take a lot of money to make energy efficient, or to my likings with new fixtures or whatever it may be, and it's just too big for me and my family or whatever, then what it tends to do is it tends to hold property values back. I think if you create some opportunities for people to be able to do this, in downtown Concord, it happened. When I first moved to North Carolina in '87, you could buy those big houses on Union Street in downtown Concord, North Carolina, for about $35,000 a piece. They were big houses in what is the historic district. About $35,000. That's just 40 years ago. $35,000. People did. and they converted some of them to apartments. Okay? And that lasted for about by the mid-90s. Those apartment dwellers had started attracting the restaurants into the downtown, which then attracted people to buy the house, kill the apartments, put it back as a house, and reinvest in it. And those houses that I wish I had bought, as many as I could possibly squeeze blood out of my wallet or turn them 35,000, are all $6, $7, $8, $900,000 houses today. Every single one of them. And so that regentrification, and some people see gentrification as bad, and it can be very bad when it displaces people. But when it's simply re-injecting life as the void or the vacancy, let's say I retire out of my home, and my home value is not that great because it's just not the right home for the market today. Sometimes opportunity to bring that house back into the market. Like I said, even in your historic district, if I could convert one to 2 units or 3 units, and you couldn't tell it from the outside, where's the harm in that? If I could park, people can live in it, and now we've got people that are wanting to live here and wanting to move here and wanting to shop here, and therefore creating that demand for the small business owner. You know, so I'm going to suggest to you to keep in perspective that this whole thing is kind of a cycle that will continuously do this over the decades. And you will see people come and go from different scenarios in your community. Keep that in perspective. That's a part of the market that we can either suppress or we can expose. Because you do control the market. I've had boards tell me before that we don't control the market. Excuse me. That zoning map, you control the supply of commercial property on the market. You control the supply and density of residential property on the market. You control that market. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Any other questions from the board?
I'm done.
Well, thank y'all. for
I'm
the
whooped.
I'm gonna hire this guy.
Take it with you. Here, take it with you.
I just want to say, I appreciate the time that y'all put into reviewing it. Bob and Sam, your comments as well. Mr. Flo, Kyle, I know you have put a lot of work and effort in our planning board as well, so thank you all. And to those folks that are here tonight, our citizens, thank you for sticking with us tonight.
We lost one gentleman.
If I could ask just one question, and that's, so of course, 1 week from today, y'all are going to be asked to consider adopting the new UDO.
Right.
From the conversation I've heard tonight, we talked through the density discussion a little bit, and I hope we were able to assuage some of the concerns. There may be some concerns that still linger. In between now and next week, provided I don't have any additional public comments, the version of the UDO that y'all already have will be the version that I ask you to adopt. There haven't been any substantial changes or revisions except for 2 minor revisions to the zoning map. So I wanted to just ask the group, is that version the version that you're comfortable considering on June 8th?
Is the board prepared to
Yeah.
consider this version on the 8th?
It's,
There will be a draft motion, because when the planning board made its recommendation, since that time, there were those couple of revisions to the zoning map. So there will be a draft motion so that it incorporates those edits since the draft came from the planning board through the public hearing process, so that it shows how they got into it. You follow me? That would be there for your consideration. Should you elect to keep those changes or change it or add your own, we want to at least give you enough where you are sort of picking up the ball and keeping moving forward. Okay. We'll be getting that. Tom will be, I think that's all where he's getting that to you tomorrow. He usually likes to wait to hear in case there's anything else before he prepares that, because it's gonna have exhibits with it that show exactly how we got from planning board recommendation to, what'll be on the table in front of you. You still have the ability to make any change that you desire.
All right, very good. Thank you.
All right.
Very much.
With that, is there a need for executive session tonight? Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion by Mayor Pro Tem, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Bish. All in favor? All right, all opposed? All right, we stand adjourned.
Saving up your sleeve, you'll fire me just in case, right?